what I wanted to tell you about was what IFF has been doing for these past 3 or 4 years. I mentioned about system transition, and what we're working with is a lot of people around the UK and further afield who are actively involved in transforming their local health and care systems. And we're doing this in a way that achieves health and provides care which meets contemporary patterns of disease. And we're hoping that the work enables everyone to lead healthy and fulfilling lives, and when the time comes, to have a good death. And if we look at the kind of destination that we see that new system emerging, looking like, that we're not calling people patients anymore; they're people. Formerly known as patients, are working towards their own recovery from illness and distress in real partnership with providers and practitioners. Yes, they're both technologically advanced treatments that they offer, but they're very much using person-centered conversations with people rather than just giving them a one-size-fits-all, to help them discover for themselves what makes their life worth living and giving them that sense of agency and purpose in their own lives. And it's not just done at that individual level, as Paul was saying, it's done at the level of the community and the family, so that they are also flourishing. In fact, you can't have one without the other. And you can't do any of this without good food, meaningful work, safe shelter, and learning for everybody to feel they've got something to do and a part to play in making life worthwhile. And clearly we have to do this not just in relationship with human society, but in relationship to the planet. So we have to do whatever we do within the respectful, the planetary limits. So as you know, some of you, I did talk about Three Horizons in the past, ways of looking at this landscape of change through different perspectives. And I'm not going to go into detail about this right now, but there are more slides there if you're interested. But to suffice it to say that IFF is working. There's a whole book about this on transformative innovation, a guide to practice and policy for this system transition, written by Graham Lester, that helps us navigate this very tricky, turbulent time. And the idea here is that over time, this new pattern, the third horizon, is wanting to emerge. It's the one that is in keeping with our deepest aspirations. And the current pattern, the first horizon, is not fit for purpose, and it cannot survive given the changing circumstances that we're faced with. And there's this second horizon, which is the innovation space, that is both sustaining the first horizon and also helping to transform that whole system such that we emerge from this turbulent transition in a way that's much more in keeping with our hopeful aspirations. This is why we call this this third horizon the patterning of hope. So I mean, it's a bit of a scruffy diagram, but what we're trying to say in the course of this is that IFF is trying to support, through action learning, through sharing our understanding of what this third horizon looks like, through frames and tools, we're trying to support the emergence of that third horizon into the future. And we hope to do that also by bringing staff with us and by releasing resource that's tied up and locked up in this really clunky old-fashioned system in order to feed that new pattern of thriving in the future. So just to give you one example from work in Lambeth, this is a rich picture of what thriving would look like in the neighbourhoods in this part of South London, that people are informed, better informed and very much empowered. We're generating health because people are thinking about health and how to feed it. There's a richness in that community resource. You can see all of the headings. We did some clustering after some sort of engagement work here, and I think there's the idea that the culture is shining. There's a lot of goodwill, and it's recognizing, acknowledging that goodwill, that people want to help, they want to be able to contribute. It's finding ways for that to happen in ways that are feeding this new system. So when we asked them what would help with that, this is the sort of thing that they started to say. We need more people participating. We need to model this notion of this thriving community. We need skillful, honest conversations, good relationships with the statutory services, because this was very much community neighborhood work that I'm talking about here, and to see the bigger picture. So again, lots of ideas that came up there. And just to give you one example of what of in Streatham neighbourhood, something I was very touched by really was these evening sessions around chronic pain peer support, which was a really good example of this kind of collaborative work on the ground, very much meeting the local need. Chronic pain is one of the biggest reasons why people keep coming back to see their GP year in, year out. And they feel very lonely. They feel difficult to express their experience of this. So having evening sessions where you're sharing your experiences with others can be very empowering. And obviously, you've got a lot of the technical support and advice you're being given by the clinicians, but you also got this social connection and social support. And so one example, that illness made me withdraw from myself. Being able to be here with others is very important to me. And I think we're beginning to acknowledge just how important this connection is for health and well-being and for recovering from illness. I just want to mention a few really important books that have come out in the last few years. This one is actually this year. It's an American book. I don't know, Laura, if you've come across it yet. Arlene Geronimus is a Harvard public health researcher, spent a lifetime looking at the inequalities in American society, but really starting to show that this experience of discrimination, marginalization, exclusion, institutional attitudes to your life, and the complexities of trying to keep a roof over your head, get the childcare you need, etc., causes extraordinary stress in people's lives. And that stress shows up in premature aging, in effect, premature onset of chronic diseases, whether it's cardiovascular, diabetes, chronic pain is another one, and cancer. And she writes very eloquently about women's health in particular, and some very interesting and I think important lessons around childbirth and maternity care, which we really in this country are not getting right either. So I really felt there are lots of crossovers there to us that would be worth looking at. Another one you're probably familiar with is Nigel Crisp's Health is Made at Home, Hospitals Are for Repair, a very different framing of what this is about in terms of our health policy. It's all being focused on the hospitals, but actually that's not where health is generated. It's health is generated at home and in the community, in our families, in our everyday lives. And then the third one I wanted to mention was the Compassion Project in Frome in Somerset. You might know Helen Kingston and her crew, but Julian Abel has done some very nice work with her and looking at the case for hope and human kindness in a very community-led approach to tackling loneliness. I think that's kind of just about it, but just to mention the Health Creation Alliance, talking of manifestos and the new government, there's a really good one from the Health Creation Alliance, and I've put it up on this mural. That's probably enough for now. Where do I stop sharing my screen here?
I'm applauding you. It's very wonderful. Thank you so much. But it started for me as a student nurse in the 60s, late 60s, with seeing health inequalities for the first time. So what led up to my big break in which was the Beacon Project 25 years ago? There was a whole lead in for me. So I'm a nurse. I'm not an academic. So I went to a rough, tough secondary modern school. But what I have had the huge privilege of is partnering with Exeter University for the last, 25 years. I mean, just extraordinary people. I just want to have a quick look at that picture because that's our signature picture. And for us, it's not rocket science. It's it's a true community approach. We see a community as a community of people who live there and the community of people who work there. And you just bring them together. Not rocket science, is it? Because they all want the same thing. The people who work there want a better place to work, and the people who live there want a better place to live. So it's achieving that interdependence. That's the tough bit between them. So, small beginnings. It started on an estate in Falmouth, which was just in a terrible, dreadful. If I just tell you that I had to have police protection, I'm a health visitor by background, community nurse and health visitor. Everything was in that estate. It topped all the hit parade for all the wrong reasons with the index of multiple deprivation. Just awful. And we built a partnership. So those are just some of the headline stats. I will gallop through because I don't want you to lose the will to live. Those are just some of the headline stats. You had to work there to see how the complete lack of hope and just any sense that you could do anything about changing anything. And I want you a bit later on, when you've seen the outcomes, to ask me how much it costs, because I think that's going to be quite telling. But this was what we were faced with in 1997. So all of those headline stats. So oh, flip me, I've got the wrong one. Okay, the garden's transformed, but I've got my slides in the wrong order. Completely transformed. If you could imagine a lot of those gardens with mattresses in them and grass up to, to the height of the windows. And that's how good people felt about themselves. So imagine 2 years on then. And can you see those? Because our pictures might be down the side. But those were like, I just want to give you a sense of the immense transformation that happened. But everybody still loved that rags to riches stories. I was telling it all over the world, basically, because it was so sort of amazing. And Exeter University, I met a guy called Jonathan Stead. I know some of you are well into complexity, but I wonder if you remember the most amazing guy who left us in 2009, Professor Kieran Sweeney. I learned so much from Kieran, and it was Kieran and Jonathan, who's a GP, who heard the story and said, Hazel, I think this has got something to do with complexity. Long story short, we spent 2 years, they did, not me, they spent 2 years researching, because if we were going to transfer this stuff, everywhere is so vastly different. I mean, Cornwall's so different, although we had all the violence, all the same stuff that you get in Glasgow, Margaret. I've worked up there. It's all the same stuff, knifings, all that stuff. So what were the transferable principles? So these are pretty boring slides, but I just want you to know that those are the principles that have stayed with us. The only one that's slightly changed, we haven't changed them in 25 years. So the only one that's slightly changed, we're using different language now, is health creating, because I didn't get that narrative until I met Harry Burns, Margaret, and you'll be so, and learnt about salutogenesis in 2008-9. And that gave us a whole different narrative. But what I thought I'd do for you guys, because I'd rather we talked about it. I don't want you to have death by PowerPoint slide, because they're pretty boring. But each of these principles, and these are transferable, I'm going to show you where it's spread and how it's spread, if I can. But I'm just going to break them down just a wee bit for you. And in fact, I don't want to talk you through them, because hopefully you'll want the slides and you can read them later. But this is what we mean by community-centred and led. So unless the community is the lead agency, forget it. You're not going to change anything. They are the lead agency. They're the agency that, when people say we work in a multi-agency way, the agency they usually leave out is the community. And they often do. So Paul's heard me. I don't want to get on my soapbox. I'm present company accepted. You have to, please believe me. I know that you don't do that stuff. But it's, and I see lottery application forms. I don't get me started on money. It's the kiss of death. Don't ever start with money, because it's the worst place to start. But loads of people do. And lotteries, how do you involve your community? It's not enough to involve the community unless they lead it. You just don't bother. So it's about creating conditions. And you know, the predominant narrative is still, and it has been for donkey's years, isn't it? We need to empower communities. Wrong. They'll empower us. You know, you just need to create conditions for them. They'll do it all for themselves. And that's what this is all about. So you don't need me to read through those, but if I just show you the breakdown of each one. So place-based and collaborative. So I should have said at this first, sorry, this wasn't very helpful of me. Actually, we're a niche market. We're quite small. Really, we're a tiny team. We're quite small, but what we are known for is place-based partnerships. That's what we're known for all over the country. And yeah, so place-based and collaborative, that's what works for us. And people say, well, you can't scale it up. Well, yes, you can, but you don't scale it up, you scale across. But that's where complexity comes in. So you can read those, the breakdown of what we mean by place-based and collaborative. Oh my goodness, collaboration, multi-agency working, broader determinants of health, it works every time. Get people together. You get this incredible alchemy, don't you? When you get the police working alongside councillors, when you get the community, it's just awesome. The fire service, it's just awesome. Strengths-based, everybody talks about asset-based. We were around before Cormac Russell, love him dearly, but we've been doing strengths-based stuff for a long time before the asset-based stuff came along. So yeah, strengths-based, and it's relational. I mean, this stuff, the power of relationships, that's what I still don't think anybody's getting. They certainly didn't get it back when we did this 25 years ago. Sanjay, I remember, I hope he does. You couldn't talk about stuff like, well, you couldn't talk about people having relationships with each other. That was pink, soft, fluffy kittens knitting. No, it had to be a strategy. It had to be committee led. It had to have huge amounts of money. It's about relationships. Totally. And it always has been, and I think it always will be. Health creating, this is the sort of the one, creates conditions for, this is where the salutogenesis is about wellness, isn't it? It's about what makes people well, you know, and Nigel Crisp is totally right, that we focus, well, who was it? Antonovsky, wasn't it? He absolutely berated people, American sociologists, or the NHS really, for focusing on acute illness and not what makes people well. And we still do that. Okay, finally, I could not have got, God, at Exeter University, a particular fantastic guru, Eve Middleton Kelly, taught me, just changed my life really in about, 22 years ago, 2002, when it was Jonathan and Kieran who said this was about complexity. I didn't believe them. I couldn't get my head. Well, I didn't. I thought, no, it's just another thing. Complexity. It sounds so bloody boring too, doesn't it? But it's not. It's absolutely extraordinary. And it gave me the self-belief, the understanding. When you view particularly a disadvantaged community as a complex adaptive system, and all that stuff happens, the tiny changes, and it just gave us the self-belief, or certainly gave me the self-belief. Look, that's where it's worked. That's where it's still working. I think if I'm proudest of anything, Margaret, you might ask me about the Scottish ones. I'm not trying to claim all those places are flagship sites. They're not. It's made a difference. It's sowed massive seeds and things have gone on. One of those would be Kilmarnock. But there's a lot of clustered around Stoke-on-Trent. There's a lot in the southwest. Some of them, I mean, if I'm proudest of anything, we're proudest of anything in C2, it's the fact that these things have lasted and lasted. The community does run it for themselves. They're not dependent on external agencies. They do not realize how amazing they are. There's a young people's dance group. You just have to listen to communities. They will tell you what they need, but we've forgotten how to listen. But it does work, and those are some of the places that don't hold me up. A lot of coastal places, aren't there? But it's all, a lot of it's been organic. We haven't marketed C2. Our program, it's a 7-step practical approach called It's Not Rocket Science. It's just 7 steps, and it's practical stuff, guys. It's not what I found is missing, and what I still find is missing. Everybody's got the narrative now. Nobody knows how the flipping heck to do it. It's the practical stuff. Where do you go? Where do you start? What words do you use? It's the simple. How do you make those relationships? And you wouldn't think people would need to be taught how to make relationships, but actually, yes, they do. And so that's what our program's about. It's about changing the language as well. So this was my, I couldn't find a definition on the internet of health creation. So I I didn't make up my own, well, I suppose I did really. And that's it. And it's being used quite a bit. And the Health Creation Alliance gosh, what can I say about that? I've been working on building that. Sorry, it sounds like I'm talking about me all the time. I mean, the royal we. It's about leadership. It's about this guy you've probably all seen this and heard this, but when it's leadership, the people say we've done it for ourselves. If they're not saying that, now all those places I showed you on the map, they're not going to say C2 did that for us. They're not going to say Hazel did. A lot of them have completely forgotten. And that's how it should be. If you've got it right and you've got dispersed leadership, that's the people will say they've done it for themselves, and they're doing it. They still are. If I could tell you about they're still doing transformational work. A young mum of 3 in Middleport who's completely transformed. This is in Stoke-on-Trent. I could go on and on. There's lots and lots of places. Somebody said it earlier, don't they? Lots. I'm not saying we're amazing. Loads of people are doing good stuff, but it's flying under the radar. I think we probably got the best track record in the country, and I only can say that because I've been around for such a long time, of people still doing it for themselves, still doing it independently, and still making a huge difference. And for me, it's intergenerational, this stuff. It goes so deeply when you get it right. I wish I could have bought Grenville or one of our punk rockers on. Perhaps we could do that next time. I want you guys to hear the real voices of telling them how they've taken over the council in Dartmouth. And they're transforming.
Hazel, how is it that so many people imagine that the only thing that can be done is to do things to people rather than helping people to do things for themselves? Why is that?
Well, gosh, it's human nature, I suppose, isn't it? And we're hardwired. I mean, I'm a nurse. I was hardwired to make people better. GPs are. So it's not until you have to learn a different way, I suppose, really. But it's understanding the power of communities to do it for themselves. But it's understanding it's not rocket science. Our program, it's practical stuff. It's about releasing that latent capacity. Sanjay, bless you.
Hazel, just to say, although I knew some of this stuff already, even after all this time, it never ceases to amaze me. That was wonderful. I think the thing I took away most of all from what you said was that it's not the theory, important though that is, it is the practical. It's actually how you go about making relationships work. And I know you can't, in a talk of this kind, really explain that, but I just wish there was some way, because I would love to take that and bottle it, because I think that is the key part of what you were saying.
Yeah, completely right. And as I say, people can. The guys in the places we're working will say it far more eloquently than I can. But Sanjay, you'll be glad to know that Beacon is still going, and we're a generation down, and the TR14ers, the kids, are still going. And they ask me how much Beacon costs, please, somebody to do.
How much does Beacon cost?
It costs zip, nothing. None of our places cost anything to do. Because that's the wrong place to start. It's only what we've learned, and I still see people fall into the trap of thinking, oh, we've got to have money. We must have some money to do this. No, it create the conditions. The communities are fantastic at levering funding for themselves. They are incredible at doing it. We just think we've got to do it all the time, but we don't. And also what I kind of discovered is don't start with money. It's like the Laotzi thing, start where they are. It's an unfair place to start if you're going to. I don't know if I said projects. Forget about projects. We're obsessed with projects. Projects don't work. They don't. Projects are almost invariably, unless they come from the community themselves, but they usually don't. They usually come from somebody external with a pot of money who's got a good idea. Sometimes it makes a bit of difference. Most of the time it doesn't. And quite often it's about bringing a culture shift, creating a culture shift. It has to be an understanding of complexity will tell you that projects can't work. Nothing externally imposed on a community can work. It can't. It just can't. Because unless it comes from within, it has to. But what we need when I talk about leadership is catalyst type leaders. On any of these places I've been telling you about that are still working after all these years, there's not one leader. There's about 20. It's dispersed leadership, isn't it? Because if you have one, it doesn't matter how charismatic that catalyst person is. I can think in all the places, we've got a punk rocker. She's amazing down in Margate. But it's about if you're true to your complexity roots and you create conditions in that non-hierarchical way, leaders emerge, and they emerge from if I say to you, people who describe their communities as shitholes, that's the words they use. That's not coming from me. The power is still within them. It's always there. I've not ever found worked alongside a community that even when they describe themselves in those graphic, awful terms, that when you create the conditions, you don't see this emergence and you don't see multiple leaders emerge. And that's the excitement. And I hope you can tell it still excites the hell out of me after all these years.
Projects and diagnoses and labels come one at a time, individual by individual. And what you're talking about is the process of community development, whereby people adapt with each other and learn together and change together.
Yeah.
And that is behind all your work. And surely that's behind what needs to happen for the future.
I'd put a small word in there. I think some community developments got a bit of a bad reputation from donkey's years ago. I'd call it community self-development. You just put that word self in there and it brings a shift. But we've had amazing moments. There's been a lack of political will. It's the political system. Sorry, I would blame the political system. I would say that recession has had a massive part to play. And I mean, I know I'm going back to 2009, 10, when it really kicked in. We don't understand how to create health still. There's a lack of an understanding at a top level. I think have a guess who are our strongest partner by a country mile amongst the broader determinants of health agencies have been the police by a country mile. Again, I don't think it's in the public narrative. I don't think it's in the political narrative to really understand about this stuff. I talked about two communities earlier. I think that the community of service providers is just as beleaguered, it's just as desperate, it's just as needy as the community of people who live in a place. So that's why we take a two community approach. They are struggling too. They're on short-term contracts, aren't they? How the hell can you ever hope to my vision would be to have a workforce of a workforce right across the board of checkout advisors, everybody who knows how to create conditions for communities to lead health for themselves. That's Nigel's vision. That's my vision. It's a societal response that's needed.
So the work I'm doing at the moment is looking at what the NHS can have in its terms of impact on health inequalities or some of the issues. And we know that with the wider determinants, there's a whole range of things around, education, poverty, etc. But it boils down to the allocative value in the most loved service, public service, the NHS, the allocative value, and what we're going to see in the next year or so, because of the political will, is we're going to be completely focused on getting people off orthopaedic waiting lists, getting into A&E quicker, and being able to see your GP for the health literate. So the allocated value is against what you've been describing. And I know you were saying you don't need money, but sometimes just some resource focused on helping to create those first connections, get the momentum behind the relationship building. Because the police commissioner I was talking with saying, we're exactly the same. All of our money goes in the fighting terrorism. He says we have 2 or 3 incidents a year. Our police force, day in, day out, is in domestics, is in violence, and we've got no resource to do the stuff that's really needed because we're doing it all. So, and I wonder whether the NHS, we've got all our resources in saying, can we get the middle-aged white man back on the golf course by having his hip replaced, because that gets the waiting list down, but we can leave, kids in troubled families with complex mental health problems waiting for their resource to do it. So it's just, it's the allocative value issues that whether we've got something collectively through COIN that, because there has got to be some policy influence in describing what you've said, Hazel, is, I know you're saying we're doing it without money, but sometimes you've got to reallocate resources to say that's where we should focus our efforts, which might be instead of rather than as well as. But I think what we do at the moment is allocate all the resources on the high political impact issues, which leaves, and I wonder whether that's why we still have deteriorating issues around, life expectancy or years in healthy life. Sorry, Paul, I'm hogging this now. I'll shut up now.
No, it's good. It's good. What you're saying is right. And I also want to just throw in, James, on the back of what you just said, is why is this so difficult for people to understand? Because I think it's pretty straightforward.
It's not just the government, Paul, is it? Or James? I mean, GPs have been involved in commissioning now for many years, and it's okay sort of blaming it on the government or the politics, but there've been a lot of people involved in where large chunks of money go, and a lot of them are commissioners. So it is interesting that I was at the Kensington and Chelsea Social Council's AGM today, and they're a voluntary organisation that supports infrastructure, voluntary organisations in that area, and there's a lot of talk about making sure the communities are listened to.
That's what it is, though. It's talk, unfortunately.
Well, it's not just talk. I think it isn't just talk, but clearly there's a linkage between what Margaret was saying and you, Hazel, around changing some of the resource kind of allocations, and what's troubling at the moment in the funny kind of way I felt with one of Margaret's sort of point or question is one of the ways in which the big organizations do absorb a lot of the finance, and so organizations like community interest companies and voluntary organizations are almost really struggling at the moment to get any funds, and people with a real track record, just because for example the big providers, the NHS providers are so powerful. So but we have got clinicians and people that understand care involved with commissioning, but we still struggle to change it. So that is interesting.
I think there's hope. I think there is hope, everybody. I'm sure there is. The narrative is gradually changing. And yes, I shouldn't, Chris, you are completely right. People are understanding, I think, about more about the power of listening. I think it's not always understood how much actual revenue communities can raise for themselves, right? So what, I'll go back to Beacon only because we did Sanjay will possibly remember, no, maybe not, but we used some Treasury economists to do a piece of work. We've never got any money in C2. We're as poor as church mice, but we had a little bit left, and because people don't fund us because they don't understand. No, but I think at the root of all this, sorry, I'm going off on one now, is a poor understanding of health creation. But we got Treasury economists to measure in pounds, shillings and pence what that community in Cornwall generated for themselves, and it would have cost £4.4 million to do what they did for nothing, and so when it comes to economies, I just don't think that the real power, I'm certain that the part of the solution to health inequalities lies with the people experiencing them. That is what I absolutely believe. And I think that's poorly understood. And not many people would be of that opinion. But for goodness sake, we haven't been getting it right. Gosh, I mean, it breaks my heart to see the gulf widening, despite, I mean, we're just tiny.
Yeah. Can I come back to what James was asking about the waiting lists, though, and that allocative value? Actually, to do the work that you're doing, Hazel, and that is it helps to address this weathering phenomenon. So, in other words, people start to feel more at ease with themselves. They've got something to give to their local community. They have a bit more fun around. There's a bit more kind of vibrancy. That in itself will mean that the build-up of stress in people's bodies, which then manifests as chronic disease, slows down.
Yeah.
So a little bit of money in there will reduce pressure on the healthcare system. So although, I know you don't want to get into that kind of Peter and Paul, but nonetheless, I do think there is a very strong case to be made, but it won't be yielded over the next 6 months. No. It will probably take you 5 or 6 years to start to really genuinely get that payback. But it's a very real payback, both financially, but also societally. And I mean, the number of people chronically ill at the moment who can't get to work is a huge burden. It's a record number. About 2.3 million people are now unable to work because they're too sick. This is adults of working age. Now, that's a weathering phenomenon.
No,
that's because they've been treated like, low life by their employers. Yeah. They are badly, they've got horrible jobs, very, very bad working conditions, all of that stuff, along with all of the challenges in child support and everything else. Laura.
Well, I just want to see if I can draw some of these concepts together a little bit, because the idea of trying to measure improvement is something that's always fascinated me. And so, one of the questions is, are you actually measuring, James, in the projects, what is a sign of traction and movement forward? We have all these great national indicators, but some of the data from decades ago showed that the British smoked more, drank more, worked less, and lived longer. And I used to present that to student nurses, and they were just shocked, that the American system wasn't fantastic. And so what is that about? So, sometimes the national indicators measure these kinds of things that are measurable, but how do you measure weathering? And some of the supposition of those studies had to do with stress, had to do with oppression, had to do with inequality. And so what is it when inequality is shifting that creates hope, that shows some measure of we're doing it ourselves? How do we measure that thing and say this project, this approach is working before those other national indicators and easily measured things actually show it? Because we all on this call have done the kind of community work where, you know, when you walk in the room and something's changing, and that hope feeds on itself, and that visioning manages to pull in a certain, and how do we measure that? And how do we then carry that forward, not just as hope and wishful thinking, but as actual empowering kind of community building process that accomplishes what Hazel described very rightly as not scaling up, but scaling across. I just love that concept, Hazel. And, you know, I have 24 undergraduate nursing students right now. And one of the preceptors called me and said, I don't know what to tell you about this student. She did everything right, but something's not right. I don't know how to describe it. And as we started talking, she said she didn't care about the patient at all. Nothing was wrong. Nothing was unsafe. She actually exceeded expectations on all the assignments in her clinical rotation. But I just felt the need to tell you as her faculty that something was off. And what she needed to hear from me was the other 23 students are giving me hope about going into care as new nurses, totally excited about making the world a better place, totally excited about learning new skills. And we're giving them these community-based language, relationship-based language that I didn't have when I was a student, but we now are teaching them. So that the up and coming generation is learning the kind of language that we know and believe to be true in a context where the world is under a tremendous amount of stress. So is it that your projects aren't working, your approaches aren't working, or is it that the world has this incredible amount of stress on it right now? And the measures we have for empathy and hope and weathering aren't in place to actually capture the great work that's happening on the ground with people like Hazel and everybody else. Sorry, long thought.
I think that the brain changes that happen, you know, that immense tussle between the amygdala and the hippocampus, and I see this played out, but it's just amazing. You can almost see when that transition happens, and that's why where places we work, educational attainment goes up. I'll just give you a little, for instance, with the kids dancing group. You could just, Nigel's written about it extensively in his book. He came down to see us and he absolutely loves it. It was started by a policeman. You said you've read it, Margaret. And I was there the other day. They had a royal visit. Now it's extraordinary because those kids create their own dance moves. It's all free. They do not, it's not a dance school where they pay a fortune to do hip hop and it's the same as Beyonce, you know, all that stuff. It is. They've worked their way up. They've worked with Stormzy. Now, I mean, these guys, it's about hope, but they've self-choreographed. They create their own moves. So that's the brain. That's what happens in the brain. New brain pathways. That's what happens in communities where conditions are created and you listen to them and they get their self-belief. You start to see that transition from that. They make good health decisions. I see it all the time, and I still don't think that's understood in health services. If I just
one question I have is the work that you've been doing, Hazel. You say it's been sustained, which is amazing. Because that is actually, and I agree with you about projects, they tend to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's the problem. And they don't get disseminated to others very easily because it's the old principle of it wasn't invented here, which can be a barrier sometimes, unfortunately. But I just wonder if where you have had those successful, long-term, sustained projects, if there was a way of actually measuring the health of the communities in which this has worked. I mean, I counted about 36 spots in that kind of order of these projects that you cited. And I just wondered if any work has been done looking at those projects. And I take your point, James, that, you know, the national health is not looking good. It's looking very bad. In fact, we're walking backwards. But I just wondered if in these environments where something like this is working, where the big issue for me, I think, is about people being given control. Because I think the thing that creates the greatest distress in human life is not having control over your own destiny.
Absolutely.
And that seems to be the essence of some of the things we're talking about, and the sorts of things that you've both been talking about, actually. So because I take back to Derek Wanless, who did the project.
Oh my God,
who did the work.
I love that.
For Gordon Brown. He was an economist. I don't know if he was the guy that did this work for you, but he demonstrated the importance of giving people it was essential. He said the NHS would fall apart in about 2020.
And he was right.
And he was right. Yeah. Because people weren't taking control for themselves, and we're not giving it to them. So I've got a couple of questions there. Is there anything being done about evaluating the effectiveness on the community? If not, could that be done? Is that something that might be worth doing?
You know, this is going to sound arrogant, but we can't let evaluators loose on some. We don't feel like we can. Because they're not going to ask the right questions.
Well, no, hang on a minute. Hang on. It's how they do it, isn't it? You just said it's got to be community-based. So the evaluation has to be a community-based.
Done by the community. The community self-evaluates.
But with the support of researchers to make sure that it will be recognised by other researchers. And there's some kind of evidence-based. Because otherwise, it won't be accepted by the establishment. That's the problem.
It won't. You're completely right. And I didn't even mention the research arm that we're part of and our communities are part of, which is absolutely phenomenal. A piece of work they've just done. It's been 2 series on it now. It's called De-Stress. So it's capital D, E, capital S. And it's about poverty related stress. Just everything Margaret's been talking about. And our community partners, it is about them working in equal partnership with researchers. That's flipping hard to do to marry the academic world to our community.
It isn't easy, but it's doable.
It can
be done.
It
has been done.
It has to be done.
So I don't know. I mean, James, is there any hope in the work that you're doing? Is there any way forward?
Yes, because we're trying to establish the evidence, exactly as you were saying, Linda, to rather than have it sometimes opinion-led or examples of projects. NHS England love to write a report and then say, in Newcastle, this is happening, and in Newcastle, this is happening, in Nottingham, this is happening. And they're all disconnected individual projects as opposed to what are the principles that can be transferred independent of geography or independent of project. We've got 65 demonstrator sites. It's about a 3 million population coverage we're using as the field work. If somebody said to me, all of them are being successful, the first thing I would be going, I don't believe you. And what we're learning is as much about why things have stalled, but we are starting to uncover things that are going to be important to NHS England, even though it's a bit clunky. For example, estates planning for marginalised populations. That sometimes a particular piece of work will say, well, we'll deliver it in this service in general practice, and no one turns up. Oh, that's because we got the wrong place. We'll do it in the school, and no one turns up. Oh, we'll do it in the community centre, and no one turns up. And then when there's some project saying, we found out the right place of care where people will come to. So how did you do that? And they go, we listened. They finally got round to asking where would be comfortable, and even things like mobile estates for people who are, and I make no apology about using hard to reach. I'm tired of almost the lexicology that's come into a discipline, and we spend more time on renaming things and just saying, let's get over it, get on with whatever it is. But if you start to just take snippets of saying we've got a mobile estate for a particular hard to reach population, and somebody goes, that's a great idea, we'll buy the bus, we'll design it, and then they don't understand some of the logistics or the issues we're uncovering. For example, there's one area that did that. They bought a bus for a homeless service, equipped it, got people to do it, and then didn't ask those who had been doing it before, couldn't find anywhere to park it, and the council wouldn't let them. So didn't you have that conversation? So we're trying to establish the evidence about, if you're going to design something, there are design principles and some logistics that you need to build in before you jump over. And we're trying to build that into something that we've got strong evidence base behind it. That sounds a bit clunky, but it might be the process by which we'll have some sustainable work, because we've transferred the learning. And I think
I suppose it is picking up the essence of that which works and looking to see what are the common features of things that work in this context. And that's the sort of learning that would perhaps be could assist, I suppose, people working in this field to change mindsets, to change culture, to listening and engaging rather than imposing.
And getting generic principles that are transferable, which will help it to be sustainable, rather than here's what happened in this place. And I agree, the project
it's got to be the distilled principles that work. And can I just say, we've had some epic fails. I haven't made that clear. Epic fails on a ginormous scale. Plymouth was a disaster. That the resistance we've had, and I think it's if you're pioneering, and we've been pioneers, and honestly, I cannot tell you how many times we've been shot down. But what we did discover was that even where we think we failed, there's been some early adopters. Now,
who's resisting, Hazel, when you say you're up against all that resistance?
Organisations, other organisations set up to solve problems. That they become self-supported. Beacon worked in Falmouth because we didn't have any other organisations. It's other organisations, and it's that power struggle. Power is a human nature. I can't even watch the news. It's so horrific at the moment. But it's part of human nature, and it's no good moaning about. You're going to get power struggles everywhere, but it's from other organisations, never the community, ever.
Well, can I just say the reason why I went into those questions at the start of this evening was because it was a sort of three horizons by stealth, as it were. What we've got is the beginnings of an understanding of the patterns that we ourselves are participating in here around our understanding of our current system, the focus on money, the alignment, I think, pressures in the system, etc. What is working, not very much by the looks of things, which is interesting. So there's a bit of a gap on the innovation side. However, what's hopeful is, Hazel's work, obviously. The narrative is changing. People are recognizing the importance of connection and the links that are being made between health and climate. And then the what's missing question is reframed as what might help pull us through. And knowing how to do real community health. I think what we're trying to say here, Hazel and I, in different ways, is that there's a difference between community health services and how to reorganize and manage those differently and all the rest of it, compared to community health, which is the community creating health for itself.
For itself, totally.
And what might help pull us through this system transition we're in is letting that grow.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to stop there and just show you that that's what I had tried to do this evening.
I am in the process of launching an initiative, a campaign to get my local borough, the London Borough of Brent, to declare itself as an age-friendly community. And I've been listening carefully to some of the lessons learned. I'm absolutely understand the problems of running a project, because I've been involved in any number of projects, but I can feel the afterglow of some of them after 20 years still, and some of the friends and the relationships I made, and some of the learning. And when you said you've had some epic fails, Hazel, I wanted to say, and can you send me the presentation on those? I don't suppose you have one, but it's really important. And I'm just listening really carefully to how we can do something a little bit differently. It's not health-based as such, though it's got huge implications for well-being in all sorts of ways, and how you measure it. And I suppose you will end up measuring the number of public toilets that are open and things like that, which is no bad thing. But it's given me lots of food for thought. So thank you very much.
I was just going to say that not just indicators of health, but indicators of effective collaboration.
Sure, and have fun. You know, we have huge fun in C2. We just laugh all the time, honestly, even when we fail.
It's a codependence kind of dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thinking about it.
Interdependence is.
But
codependent
relationships are where you have to feel, you only feel valued because you are you're making somebody else well or something.
Yeah, because I'm just intrigued about why it seems to be so difficult to do the glaringly obvious.
Yeah.
And if we can at least name why it seems to be so difficult for people to do this kind of thing, then maybe they were more likely to do it.